So I need an actual go signal from Emily.
Yeah, she's going to do it in just a second.
Well, so she just gave me a thumbs up, and I don't know if that is a go signal or not.
2 seconds. Hi everybody, We'll start. I've got Lord Deben on the phone, he'll join in a second.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the official opening of the Water and Climate Pavilion. I'm Christine McGourty, Chief Executive of Water UK, the trade body for water companies in the UK, and we're really honoured to be here today. This is the first ever water pavilion of its kind in the history of COP, and we are just one of many partners who've played a role in getting it off the ground. I'm joined today by several very eminent speakers, and then we'll be having a panel shortly to discuss Race to Zero and resilience. But first of all, I'd like to invite up to speak Togni Holmgren of the Stockholm International Water Institute that has played an absolutely key role in getting this pavilion here today. Togni, over to you.
Thank you, Christine, and welcome all here in Glasgow this morning of first COP ever with the Water Pavilion. Now, our journey started 12 years ago at COP15 in Copenhagen. A number of us came to realize that water was not on the agenda. So we started slowly but step by step together with a number of partners, you see all of them here behind me, to bring and raise the awareness about water. Come Paris 2015, of course, with the Paris Agreement. In 2017, we had the Bonn meeting when we had the first official water day, also co-arranged with UNFCCC Secretariat. We had the Blue COP in Madrid, the Chilean Blue COP in 2019, and here we are today with the first ever water pavilion. And this is great. And for me, that is a check. If I draw a map, Copenhagen, Paris, Glasgow, that is a check. So, being in the heartland of key negotiators is very important. I have been a negotiator myself, and I know how important it is and how valuable to get in touch with people from real life, like we are dealing with water on a daily basis. So now we have the opportunity to raise awareness on the value of water, not only for adaptation, we know too much or too little water, but also for mitigation, when we know that we can also provide solutions to mitigate to renewable energy sources, but also to carbon capture. And I think this is very important. And now we have the opportunity to be part, and I think we should be part of the future. We have water on the agenda of the COPs to come. So I'm very impressed by all our 30+ organizations that are co-organizing this water pavilion. And I'm very pleased also, especially pleased also to have a number of government representatives, also governments behind us. So I am now soon going to leave the floor to our colleagues from Scotland, UK, Netherlands, Germany and Tajikistan. So let us make water heard of these 2 weeks in Glasgow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Togni, for those words to get us going today. And I'd like to now invite up Michael Matheson, who is the Cabinet Secretary in Scotland for Net Zero Energy and Transport. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for your invitation to join you here for the opening of the Water Pavilion. What's particularly impressive is the journey that you've been through in order to make sure that water is very much in the minds of those who are taking part in COP26 with your first water pavilion at a COP event. I'm pleased that Glasgow has been able to finish off your map and provide you with a check. I'm also pleased that the Scottish Government have been able to be one of the sponsors of this particular pavilion. The thing that struck me about having a water pavilion at COP is that water is the lifeblood of our planet, and it is critical to so many parts of our day-to-day lives and to our economy. And therefore, as we go through a period where we look to identify the challenges and the measures we need to take in order to tackle climate change, it is only right that we also ensure that water is very much at the centre of our thinking. Of course, those of you who have arrived in Glasgow and in Scotland over the course of the last day or so will have noticed that water is not something that we have a lack of. And to the extent that several parts of Scotland just now are suffering from significant floods as a result of recent adverse weather. And we can see as climate changes that water is playing an increasing part on our society, not just in terms of how we make use of it, but also in the impact it has on people's lives, whether it be through flooding or causing major disruption to our transport network. And that's why it's critical to us all to make sure that we look at what we can do in order to manage water and to use it in the right way going forward. We pride ourselves in being a hydro nation here in Scotland, and we like to work with countries right across the world around the whole challenge around water. Scottish Water, our public utility that's responsible for the delivery of water in Scotland, provides a first-class service and is also internationally recognised for its role in helping to support new technology and new ideas around the management of water. So I hope while you're here in Scotland, you have an opportunity to experience not only the fine and good hospitality of the people of Glasgow and of Scotland as a whole, but you also have an opportunity to learn about Scotland as a hydro nation and how we manage water and our water resources. And alongside that, our desire to work with partners across the world to support them in their work within the water sector as well. So, in drawing my remarks to a close, can I wish you well for COP26. I hope water is very much at the forefront of the negotiators' minds as they go into the discussions over the course of the next couple of weeks. I hope that we don't provide too much water for you during your time here in Scotland, but I certainly hope that the Pavilion serves you well and that you have a good event over the course of the next 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those inspiring words, Minister. And now we have another speaker. I'm delighted to welcome up here Jamshed Shoimzoda, who's the first Deputy Minister for Energy and Water Resources from Tajikistan. Over to you.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to behalf of the Tajik to greet all of your delegation to the open ceremony in the Water Pavilion. As my colleague mentioned, this is undoubtedly a historical moment. Since the first time in the history of the COP, we have a special water pavilion in the beginning organized. However, this is logically justified, since the water plays a crucial role in the adaptation and mitigation measures, as well as the achievements of climate resilient agenda. It's a great honor for us that Tajikistan, along with the Netherlands, Germany, Great Britain and Scottish government, as well as other partners, has become so organizing of this pavilion. And this is logical too, since our country is actively promoting the water issues in the global agenda. As you know, over the past 20 years, by the initiative of Tajikistan, and the United Nations General Assembly has adopted 8 resolutions on water, including the announcement of the International Decade for Action, Water for Sustainable Development, 1828. This is in mind the President of the Republic of Tajikistan, His Excellency Mullah Rahman, has invited to the high-level panel on water on 2016. And now he is a member of the Water and Climate Leaders promoting the integrated water and climate agenda at all levels. As already noted, Tajikistan and Netherlands are so chairs of the United Nations Conference on Water 2023, which are expected to become water-shared moments in the world community. With these our partners, UNDESA, UN, Water, we are making every effort these days to make the preliminary process this important, even inclusive the conference itself a success. Tajikistan will be hosting the second Dushanbe conference on the water decade on June next year, which according to the UN General Embassy resolution on modalities will become the key event in preparation for United Nations Conference on the Water 2023. Naturally, the success of these events depends on the mobilization of the efforts of all stakeholders. And we are really on your support in this process. With the framework of the COP26, we are organizing 5 side events, targeting various aspects of the integrated water and climate agenda, including promotion, the key role of the water in addressing climate change adaptation, and showcase global initiative to address water as a climate issues. I'm convinced that the Water Pavilion will make its worthy contribution and to addressing issues related to water and climate, and will be also contribute to the successful implementation on the Sustainable Development Goals on water and international decade for action. Water sustainable development by demonstration is the best solution. Tajikistan, as my colleague from the Scottish mentioned, also have a huge water resource, but we are facing with a problem. We are facing with a problem. More than 60% of the water resource of Central Asia generated in Tajikistan. But we already know what does it mean. What does it mean climate change? What does it mean water? And how we can work together to solve the new challenges, the new climate agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Great to have another perspective. And joining us virtually now, I'm delighted to say we have Henk Ovink, who is a Special Envoy for International Water Affairs in the Netherlands. Henk, over to you.
Thanks so much, Christine. And thanks first, Togni, for setting us up in this check-the-box Copenhagen, Paris, Glasgow approach. And yes, we have a water pavilion. And thank you also, Jamshed Chomzoda, not only for your grand remarks, but also for your partnerships towards the UN 2023 Water Conference. Great to be with you from the Netherlands, on my way by train to Glasgow, almost. Having a water pavilion at COP is amazing. Water connects, as we know, people, cities, countries across the world. And water has to be at the COP, and it's good that it's finally here, and it's here to stay. 90% of all these climate disasters involve water. So the water pavilion is the climate pavilion. It is the place where water can show how it can support the world in dealing with climate change, show solutions and partnership, and bring the world, the climate world and beyond, together on water. Water helps with mitigation, wastewater treatment, offset carbon, nature-based solutions, helping with deforestation. And water helps with adaptation, of course. Better water management, again, nature-based solutions, making more room for our rivers and watersheds, transportation and food security. The only thing water asks of us is to be managed and used responsibly, to be valued inclusively and comprehensively. Investing in water has a trickle-down effect for all sectors, cutting across all silos and helping us to deliver not only on the Paris Agreement, but also on all sustainable development goals. And that makes water and water management such a complex and hard-fought issue. This is the place where we address this complexity at the Water Pavilion at COP26 in Glasgow. This is the place where we connect, confront, but also inspire, help pathways forward. The Water Pavilion presents, among many, the Water Tracker, where the partners help countries to improve the position of water and their national adaptation plans, and the Resilient Water Accelerator, where partners help countries to develop better financeable integrated water projects. It is the place to come together. This is the place where we start identifying and forging coalitions across all sectors, silos, regions, and cultures. Implement, replicate, and scale up water-based climate innovation. Water, in my words, is the springboard, the lever for climate action and sustainable development. It needs your attention, your management, and your capacity, and also your investments. And because water is everywhere and in everything, we own it collectively. So we have to manage it collectively and in a comprehensive way. I call upon countries and partners to coordinate better with each other, to work together in a more integrated way. And let's give each other the freedom to evolve into resilient countries that are well adapted to climate change. By getting the data on climate and water in order, by identifying weak points through stress tests, by creating national integrated adaptation plans, by securing capacity, by developing high quality projects based on these national plans, by arranging finance, and finally, by maintaining and managing adaptation measures. There's a lot to do. We are lagging behind. We have to make up for this. We have to identify those solutions and scale and replicate them across the world. The good thing, we have the people, the knowledge, and the willpower, and of course, enough finance. So let's make it accessible. Let's work on water as we look ahead towards COP27 and the 2023 UN Water Conference, co-hosted by Tajikistan and the Netherlands. And just to end, really want to thank all the partners of the Water Pavilion. Look forward to a COP that is water inspired, where water is the blue thread across climate action. And to say that we have perhaps just enough time to reinvent ourselves, just enough time to right what's wrong. So let's get to work. Thank you very much.
And our thanks to Henk Ovink for those very inspiring call to action there. Now for our keynote, I'm delighted we have another very special guest joining us virtually. He is someone who has had a long and distinguished career of many decades in public service as an MP in the UK and played an absolutely critical role in many environmental policy matters. He's also now chair of the Climate Change Committee, which advises the government here on all matters net zero. So without further ado, over to Lord Deben. Delighted to have you with us today. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be with you, even though it is only virtually for the moment. But I'm pleased also at the innovation of a water pavilion, because water is at the very heart of the issues with which we are dealing. I come from the east of England. We are a water-stressed area. It's not easy. And I'll just say that 40 years ago, when I first became the Member of Parliament for the constituency I represented for some 35 years, water was not a problem. I once met a Dutchman who just moved to Britain to grow apples. And he said it was so good because he didn't need to do any irrigation. It was just right. Well, for various reasons, that bit of the constituency was removed out, and I never met him again, not for another 30 years. But when I met him again, he explained that he now had moved from not needing any irrigation to needing some irrigation, to needing a lot of irrigation, to needing too much irrigation for the licenses that he had, having to go over to a very modern Israeli irrigation system if he were to continue to grow his apple trees. That's in half my lifetime. That's the change that has happened. It's an acute and enormous change just here in Britain, and we are lucky enough to be less affected than so many countries throughout the world. And water is at the heart of our lives. We know that. We can see it. Every religion has water as a symbolic part of talking about the relationship between human beings and creation. And anyone who's read that remarkable statement of what climate change is about, the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si, will see that he makes this enormously important comment that climate change is the symptom of the disease. It's the symptom of what we have done to the world. And one of the things that we've done to the world is to be absolutely reckless in our use of water, in the way we have polluted water, and in the systems which we have, which use water without any possible consideration of where it will come for tomorrow. As the population grows, so the demands for water grow. And for so many people in the world, there is neither decent drinking water nor proper sewage, so that, of course, instead of the good circle, they have the worst circles, the kind of things that most of us in the rich countries haven't experienced before. So I celebrate the opening of the Water Pavilion, and I do so hoping that people who go into it will just recognize that at the heart of dealing with climate change is the acceptance by the rich countries of the fact that we have caused the problem and that therefore we have to pay for the changes. The saddest thing that's happened so far is that we have not so far anted up the money we need to help developing countries to move from where they are to where they ought to be without the destructive, dirty in between, which is how we managed it. And we need to do that very much across the board, but nowhere is it more important than dealing with water. For climate change creates bigger problems for water than perhaps for anything else. Countries which once were able to grow crops and export them as well as feed their own people can no longer do so. There are areas where war is breaking out almost every day because one community ceases to have the water it needs to feed its animals or to feed its crops, and therefore invades the next door one who still has that water. Water is going to be the geopolitical danger for all of us, and therefore we have to realize it's a global answer we have to have. Too much water and too little in every year is one of the things that will happen to many countries. But above all, it will become the source of conflict. And we shall just realize, all of us, that it's in our own interest to spend the money that's necessary to give water to the world, to clean up the water that we have, to return the seas to their pristine cleanliness, and to recognize that without that, the whole world is destroyed, and we with it.
Our thanks to Lord Deben for joining us today and kicking us off with such powerful words there. So with that keynote, we are now able to declare the Water Pavilion officially open. And to mark that point, I'm just going to ask the gentlemen who are here with us today to step up for a quick photo. Thanks very much, gentlemen. So we're about to start our panel discussion shortly. I'm just going to say a few words first. We all know that water is a very carbon-intensive industry, so decarbonisation of our sector is absolutely critical in the UK to meeting the UK's own net zero ambition. We are very proud in the water sector to be one of the first major sectors to declare a net zero ambition. In 2019, we committed to net zero on operational emissions by 2030, and that was part of a series of very stretching social and environmental ambitions. But worldwide, of course, the water challenges are about far more than just net zero. 2 billion people living in water-stressed areas, and climate change is making the problem worse. So before I introduce the panel speakers to you, we're just going to play a short video. a route map to net zero. And we're delighted also to have been a partner in the UN's Race to Zero campaign, which as of today has so many members that it's serving 72 million customers. So fantastic progress there. Now, in this discussion, as I said, we'll be talking to colleagues in the UK and worldwide about tackling net zero and resilience. I'm delighted that we have with us here Peter Simpson, Chief Executive of Anglian Water, Sam Larsen, my colleague at Water UK, who's been the driving force behind our route map and leader on all things carbon. We're also joined online, I'm very pleased to say, by Tracy Slatter of Borwen Water in Australia. And from MiamiDade County in Florida, USA, we have Hardee and Anand. So I think I'll start with you, Tracy. Would you like to give us a brief introduction on your role your role and your journey to net zero and why you decided to join as a partner? Tracy, over to you.
Well, thank you, Christine. And I do want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Well, there's so many reasons to be a part of this, isn't there? There's our customers, the environment, the new economy. And, you know, we're really lucky at Bowen Water. We're Victoria, which is a big state of Australia. We are one of the largest urban water corporations in regional Victoria. And we also have enabling policy settings from our Victorian government, which is committed to halving emissions by 2030. At Bowen Water, we committed to being net zero emissions by 2030 and 100% renewable by 2025. And we're well and truly on that journey. We've done things that many of in the water sector have done, including putting in place large solar farms, battery behind the meter to capture that solar. We've entered into partnerships within the water sector and with our own customers to purchase renewable energy from large-scale renewable energy producers. We're doing mini hydro and the like. But one of the things that really is driving us is to make sure that everything that we do helps add value to our customers and helps our region prosper in the new economy. And so the initiatives that really excite me are where we've partnered up with customers and around the circular economy. For example, one of our initiatives turns the trade waste model on its head. Instead of two large global exporting manufacturers having to pay to treat their sewage, we now take that high-strength sewage straight down the sewer, capture the methane. With a cogen engine, we generate renewable electricity, and that pulls our plant right off the grid completely, but also we'll heat hot water and return that to those manufacturing businesses so that they don't need to use gas to heat their hot water for production. And in another partnership, we've partnered up with all of the municipalities in our region, where all of the curbside food organics and other industrial waste combined with our own sewerage will be turned into two products. One is biogas to run the plant off renewable energy, but the second product is biochar, which will be provided to farmers in our own region to generate improved soil qualities and of course, replace the need for as much chemical fertilisers, which have huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions in their production. So we're really interested in how we can see this not only as the race to zero, that's critical, but to do it in a way that keeps prices down for our customers, for our core business, leverages our infrastructure, and delivers value not only for ourselves but for our partners, for our customers in our community.
So many important issues there. That's a really good way to get us started. I'm going to come to Peter Simpson next. Peter, in addition to the UK route map that I talked about, obviously Anglian has its own fantastic route map to net zero. It'd be really good to hear a little bit about that, and also a little bit about what you learned in that process that would help those who are embarking on that journey, wherever they are in the world.
Thank you, Christine. It's fantastic to be here this morning. At Anglian Water, we've been on this journey for quite a few years, actually. Going back to 2010, we set an ambition to halve the amount of embodied or capital carbon in everything we build. Last year, we achieved 61% reduction in that. We've seen in the last 5 years alone over a 35% reduction in our process emissions and our operational carbon emissions. So we've made a lot of progress, but like all companies, we're really pleased to be part of that ambition to reach net zero, which in the UK water industry is by 2030. So what's that told us? What's that taught us along the way? Well, first of all, the importance of working together, collaboration. We've seen some fantastic initiatives coming out in the water industry where innovation is being shared between water companies. We have a centre of excellence called Spring, which is generating lots of great new opportunities on this agenda, where together we're making huge progress. It's also important that we have alignment between what we're doing as companies and what governments are doing and what regulators are doing, but also alignment with communities and customers and working with them, for example, on reducing the amount of water they use, which helps them not only in terms of water, the water availability in the environment, but also helps in terms of energy. And there have been some really, really fantastic opportunities coming out of this, things that we wouldn't have seen before, when we come together and we work together. So one of the exciting initiatives at the moment is something called triple carbon reduction. And that's a project which we're involved with lots of other water companies, United Utilities, Severn Trent, lots of universities, 3 universities, where we're looking at generating green hydrogen from effluent from water recycling centres, sewage works. We're using that hydrogen to compress it, to use in our generation for resilience. But also we're using the oxygen in a very new process to reduce process emissions, which are one of the really big challenges that face us as a water industry generally. So as we watch the reduction in operational emissions come down towards 2030, the biggest challenge we face remains process emissions, so the emissions of nitrous oxides and methane in particular. So what can we do about that? Well, that's the toughest challenge, and that's the one which we're innovating and collaborating together on. So it's about alignment, it's about long-term thinking and plans, it's about that alignment between government, regulators, companies, working with customers to reduce their demand. It's about the opportunities from innovation and collaboration. As I say, we've got a fantastic basis in the UK through the work we're doing in the Centre of Excellence, Spring, and in fact the regulator leaning in there and giving us an innovation fund, the Breakthrough Fund, which has driven so many of these great projects forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Peter. And I'm sure we'll come back to those themes of innovation, collaboration, partnerships. Just to go now across the Atlantic, it would be great to hear from you, Hardee, about your perspectives on both the challenges and the opportunities.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here virtually. So MiamiDade, as we know, is ground zero from a number of perspectives, from climate change and sea level rise, the shocks and stresses that we face here from the hurricanes. And we are bounded by water on all sides, a very shallow topography. And the Biscayne Aquifer is our source of drinking water. And our mayor is actually in Glasgow at the moment. She's earned the name, the water warrior, Mayor Daniela Levine-Cava. And she had the foresight, and she wanted to lead the county from a standpoint of what we call One Water. So as a matter of fact, very recently over here, my role has transitioned partly within the utility that I worked in for the last 6 years, and also from a countywide standpoint in terms of integrating and managing our water resources from a watershed standpoint. Water, as we know, has no boundaries. We've regulated it in different silos, But I think the intent here now is for us to make sure that we develop a long-range infrastructure plans, both on water, wastewater, and stormwater from that watershed standpoint. From a utility standpoint, one of the top 10 utilities in the nation here, and serve about 2.4, 2.5 million customers. We've got 3 large water plants, 3 large wastewater plants, totaling about 300 million gallons a day, about 15,000 miles of linear assets combined in terms of water and wastewater. And so we are aggressively working towards implementing the recommendations of a recently released report by the mayor earlier this year, which is the climate action strategy. We've got the resilience 305 reports, and also sea level rise strategy. And all of these plans come together in ensuring that we are becoming resilient, but we are also developing master plans to make sure that we have our own paths to net zero by 2050, 50% emissions to be reduced by 2030. So we'll talk more, but I think broadly, these are some of the efforts that we're making out here in the county.
Loads going on there, clearly. Very interesting to hear more about that too. I'd like just to turn to Sam Larsen now. Sam, I've just touched briefly on the UK route map. It would be good if you could just tell us a bit more about that, and in particular highlight any parts of that have international relevance.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. So I think the first main conclusion from the route map to draw is that reaching net zero by 2030 is absolutely achievable in the water industry. There's a number of scenarios set out in the route map that shows how the industries could get to net zero through a number of different emphasis on different areas of the business. Now, underneath that, there really are 2 blocks. It's a 2-part story as how the water sector will transition to net zero by 2030. The first block is really very well aligned with what's going on globally in other sectors. So the transition globally towards low carbon energy, renewables, solar, wind, plays a major part in getting the water sector to net zero by 2030, because of course a lot of the emissions are associated with the consumption of electricity, pumping water and treating water. So the first part of the transition to net zero is actually very well aligned with the emphasis that we're seeing through the International Energy Authority and individual country NDCs, which also call for high degrees of renewables in company plans. So that first part is very well aligned. The second part is quite different, and in contrast, there are a number of policies that need to be put in place to allow the rest of the emissions to fall to net zero. And Peter spoke well on the point of process emissions, which is one of those items that sits in that block of emissions which are hard to abate. They're recognised around the world as something that doesn't currently have a policy framework to enable it to be reduced. So pulling that back together, we've really got that 2-part story. Obviously, the first part is moving forward under its own steam now as the world itself moves towards greater amounts of renewables. Now, the second part is quite an exciting time here in the UK, because last week we had the government's new net zero strategy, which for the first time put in black and white an indication from the government, a signal that they want to see greater action in that second category. So over the next few weeks and months, we'll be working with government and regulators to put the flesh on the bones on that, to really emulate that success that's come from renewables around the world. There's a model there that governments have applied to get traction on decarbonisation, and what we'll be looking to see is that model applied on that second category, those hard to abate emissions.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Peter, did you want to come in and add anything on that topic?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think one of the ways that it's important to think about this topic is as an area of opportunity. Quite often we talk about all the threats and the danger and the hazards, and sometimes that's not that motivational. So maybe flip it the other way and let's think about what the opportunities are. And I'll give one particular example. In the last few years, as a company, we've raised nearly £1 billion of green finance at much lower rates of interest. We've done that off the back of a very strong record on our reduction in particularly capital carbon involved in things we build. That's enabled us to go to the finance markets and borrow money much more cheaply. That money is then being invested in resilience schemes and in adaptation schemes to help us as a business, as well as reducing carbon. And the biggest project we've got at the moment is actually a 400-kilometre large diameter pipeline from the north of our region down into the southeast, interconnecting with lots of different regions to help us with some of the challenges that Lord Deben talked about earlier, exactly the same area, to give us flexibility to move water around, to deal with the fact that we've got less water available and more water needed for the environment, but to give us flexibility against those climate scenarios that we see coming towards us. So there's an example of an opportunity, great carbon credentials as a company, but as a country you can have that as well, ability to access a green wall of finance and then take that money and invest it back in resilience and reducing carbon. So sometimes just thinking about this as an opportunity rather than just always a threat is a good thing to do.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. It's a really good point. Tracy, would you like to come in here? It'd be really interesting to get your perspective on seizing the opportunity. Yeah, feel free to come in now and yeah, give us the Australian perspective on that.
Yeah, look, I think the point that Peter's making about this being an opportunity is absolutely critical one for us to embrace. We see opportunity all over with this initiative. As I said earlier, you know, this is an opportunity for us to help lead the transition into the new economy for our region, to build skills and jobs in the new capabilities that we're going to need going forward. Even in small ways, you know, our frontline sewage treatment staff who, you know, talked to me years ago about sort of being at the bottom of the hierarchy. They used more colourful language than that. And I talked to them about how that's going to turn on its head and that they will be at the top of the technology chain. And that's been born to be true. And even fairly recently, having a breakfast chat with them without even initiating it, they're proudly showing me the work that they're doing, generating renewable energy, and the fact that the plant's now offline and that they're partnering up with other companies. And that takes me to the next opportunity, which is not to see this as the water sector working on its own. We have to work with other water companies and with government, but we also have to, I think, look at the opportunity to work with our customers. The examples that I gave before with two large global export food manufacturing businesses, for them, this is not their core business. But when we lent in and listened to the challenges they have around managing waste and facing uncertain and increasing energy prices, we knew that they had a desire to want to change their business model, but they really weren't focused on it and didn't really, and we're concerned about consultants and things coming in, but they're our customers. They've been our customers for decades. They trust us. And so when we offered to partner with them on something that was good for us and good for them, and it took a lot of attempts, but we finally came up with a model that worked, that was commercial, that gave them a commercial positive outcome, that's given us a commercial positive outcome. Everyone's excited about it, and it's putting those townships on the map as well. So I think there's real opportunity, and also even thinking about the issue that Lord Denton talked about, the drying climate. We've got a significantly drying climate in our part of the world. The beautiful reservoir behind me in the last 3 decades has seen a 30% reduction of inflows. And people are valuing rivers. They want their rivers to be flowing, to be full of life, to be supporting native animals and vegetation. And so I think there's another opportunity for us to start thinking about climate independent sources of water, integrated water management, recycled water initiatives in a far bigger scale than we have before, so that we can really create a much more sustainable future. And instead of people looking at us just as the organisations that mean that you can turn the tap on or flush the toilet, we're actually looking to us as leaders of this change and partners of this change to a new, far more sustainable future with better jobs and with better prospects for people's kids and grandkids.
Wonderful to hear you talk with such passion about the opportunities. And Hardee, it would be good to hear from you. Are you seeing that too, the opportunities there, whether it's for innovation, partnerships, new technologies? Tell us a little bit about how you see the opportunity as well as the threat.
Yes, thank you. I really want to ditto all the other speakers who've touched on this subject. And yes, I do. And from my standpoint, our effort is focused on doing exactly the same, but also looking at things where we start mining all the intrinsic energy in our wastewater systems, from cogen to methane to biogas. We have, for example, a landfill that is co-located next to a treatment plant, where we're looking to take the gas that is currently being flared and converting it into cogen. One of the opportunities I see is with the digital age coming to fruition, is the use of data and making decisions based on an integrated approach across the watershed. As I had said, our data is quite siloed. We look at models, regulators look at it from a different lens. Our community and the customers that we serve look at it from a standpoint of resiliency, right? In the aftermath of a shock or a disaster, the expectation from us is to make sure that we provide safe drinking water and, of course, public health and hygiene. So I think if there's an opportunity there, and like Peter said, trying to convert the threats to opportunities, we're always going to be confronted with some shock or stress. The pandemic has shown it. And we're talking about emerging contaminants in water. We're talking about PFAS. We have to start adapting to making better technologies. Ultimately, it all translates into the cost and affordability to our customers, right? So I think from that standpoint, the opportunity I see is to be able to have some sort of better sharing of data across the board, not just locally, but regionally and nationally. And the opportunity is also to make sure that the actions that we take are aligned to national and international efforts. Everything that we do should be aligning to the SDGs. So I think these are some of the opportunities and the exciting days for the water sector ahead.
Good to just turn to you on the UK. How are companies here balancing this challenge of adaptation and resilience?
Well, I think they're first and foremost not thinking about an either or. They're thinking about both things at the same time. I mean, as a water sector, we're right in the heart of the challenges of the changing climate. We deal with it in terms of one extreme drought, we deal at another extreme in terms of flood. So we're right in the heart of it. So not thinking about either or, thinking about both. And as the example I gave earlier, there are opportunities to think about both and get opportunities to invest in resilience from your carbon credentials. So frankly, why wouldn't you do it? So I think the other really important point, I think, is having a long-term perspective on some of this stuff. So when we think about water resources, it's really important to plan for those. And it's really important to plan for them in light of the new paradigm we've got, which is less predictable than it was in the past. So rather than having sort of static ways of planning for water resources, to plan on the basis of scenarios. We don't know what the next 25 years is going to look like in terms of water resources around the world. So we have to think about what are the potential scenarios that we could face, and then build systems and behaviours that give us the best chance of surviving those scenarios from an environmental point of view and from a community point of view. So we need different thinking in light of some of the new challenges, and we need to have those long-term plans, not just for water resources, but also for the drainage side of things. And those two things need to fit together, and they both need to be built on the same sort of understanding and scenarios. And we need to have that alignment between how the government thinks about it, the regulators think about it, companies think about it, and ultimately we've got to engage our communities and customers in understanding some of those challenges as well. So I guess the headline really is, let's not think about them in silos. Let's not have conversations just about net zero or just about adaptation. Let's have conversations about both the things at the same time, always. They're things that shouldn't be separated out.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And Tracy, it would be good to get your perspective on that with some immediate challenges right in front of you. How are you thinking about this challenge of balancing adaptation and resilience and preparing long-term for the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, well, it is absolutely a critical issue, and it is about doing both at the same time and looking at the synergies that exist between them. We're going to have to invest a lot more in our infrastructure to cope with the climate extremes, the floods, the droughts that are getting more significant, and our infrastructure really needs to be able to cope with that, which is why I think it's important that when we are looking at investing in the pathway towards net zero, that we do that in a way that leverages investments we might otherwise be making in our infrastructure, and look at how we can do that much more holistically, as Peter said, looking at how we can decarbonise the construction process through better ideation and design, look at how traditional treatment plants can do a lot more than they did in the past, such as providing renewable energy and green hydrogen into the future, which in turn can fuel the vehicles, the large transport vehicles that are needed in the industry. But in turn, as we invest in that infrastructure, making sure that we're doing that in a way that is going to be resilient, especially in coastal areas, which are so much more affected by, the storm impacts and so on. So I think there's a lot for us to take on board, and it's easy, I think, for us to feel overwhelmed by it, and it's important not to. And I think that ideation and design phase of every single one of our construction projects has to be seen as an opportunity for resilience and moving towards net carbon. We can't see these projects over here are the net zero projects and the rest of it is business as usual. That way of thinking's gone. We have to be thinking of the whole portfolio and everything we do in our business, driving down waste streams, investing in ways to create the circular economy and create better and new products from the waste streams we used to have. But every construction process to be a way of designing out waste, designing out emissions, both in the design, but in the way that the infrastructure operates over the life of the asset.
Really good points there, Tracy. Peter, did you want to pick up?
I've just got to build really on the point that Tracy was making about designing things. So, I mean, if we start off with how do you avoid having to build something, that's the first question we should be asking ourselves. And quite often nature has a role to play in that. So increasingly sort of nature-based solutions can provide much better solutions than perhaps traditional concrete and pipes and pumps do. So that's a really important bit of thinking, and there's some really good examples in the water industry of what's been achieved there, whether it be treatment wetlands or actually thinking about catchment management. So a particular example that always comes to my mind is in East Anglia, we've had over recent years a big problem with a pesticide called MiamiDade. It's a slug pesticide. And traditionally what we would have done is we would have built very energy intensive treatment processes to take that pesticide out, additional processes, because none of our existing processes will remove this particular pesticide. But instead of that, what we actually did was work with thousands of farmers across the whole region to actually introduce a product substitution process, so basically putting another product in, giving them another alternative product rather than this particular pesticide. And what that actually has done is reduce the amount of that pesticide in the river. So no longer do we actually have to treat it. So we don't need to build those treatment plants. We don't need to have that energy intensity. So that's a great example of catchment management, working with the farming community, avoiding the pesticide getting in the river. Then you don't have to take it out. Then you don't have to treat it. And you don't have to use the chemicals, which are incredibly energy intensive. You don't have to use the power, which is incredibly energy intensive. So building on Tracy's point, if you can think of right at the outset what role nature, what role catchment management, before you even get into thinking about building, then that starts to give us some of the answer.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that example, Peter. It sounds like a win-win-win all round. Sam, what's your perspective, given the industry-wide nature of the work you've been doing on this?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I think it's really important to draw all of those great examples of opportunities all together, because there is a huge seam of opportunity in the water sector to help meet the global targets. So here at COP, we're hearing a lot about whether the world is on track to keep 1.5 degrees alive, and really calling out the fact that this is the critical decade. So around the world, we're looking for those sweet spots in society where there are opportunities, like all the ones that the speakers have mentioned, that can really accelerate that progress, that pace within this critical decade. And there's a number that have already been mentioned. One that only got a very quick mention so far was the opportunity for hydrogen, which is really very important. So many countries looking to turn towards some form of hydrogen solution, a way of storing renewables generated by solar or wind, store them up until times when there's less solar and wind available so that you can keep society moving. Now, the water industry has one of those opportunities. Lots of research going on, as Peter mentioned, around the world into how you can create hydrogen. Lots of pilot studies underway that are starting to bear fruit, that you can essentially create the hydrogen straight from the biogas that you make from the wastewater treatment process. So scaling that up around Europe, around the rest of the world, helps meet that commitment to generate hydrogen to help balance the electricity system. And that reduces costs for consumers because it's a cheap way of achieving it. It balances out the network, and it means consumers aren't exposed to those peaky prices that a lot of parts of the world are currently seeing.
Yeah, no, really good point, Sam. We could go on for another hour, but we'll need to start wrapping up soon. It'd be lovely to hear first from each of our panelists a little bit about what you see as the next big challenge ahead of you. We have heard about some of the challenges already, but I'll come to you, Hardee. How are you thinking about this? What do you see as the next big challenge?
Okay, sorry about that. I think for me, it is going to be being able to be proactive in terms of, being able to recognize risks ahead of us and implementing mitigative actions proactively. Ensuring that when we're piggybacking on the other speakers, when we are planning on our infrastructure projects, we've got to look at it from that lens of that triple bottom line. How are we bringing that social, economic, and environmental perspective forward, in addition to, of course, renewing our infrastructure? So I think if you're able to maintain that balance between the two, I think we would be doing a great job compared to where we are now. So that's how I would sum it up.
Tracy, how are you seeing that? The next big challenge ahead of you? You've got many, I know.
Well, look, I think we're blessed in the water sector. We have so many intelligent, highly capable scientists and engineers that we will overcome the challenges and we'll surprise ourselves with the innovations that we achieve, especially through opportunities like this where we can learn so much from each other and piggyback on the way forward. But I do think, and Samuel touched on this earlier, the process emissions, the fugitive emissions. It's one thing to be generating renewable energy and replacing non-renewable energy with renewable energy, but there's a whole lot more that's harder. And I think, that's the space that elimination, the changing the way we do our business, carbon sequestration, green hydrogen, energy productivity, they're all going to play a massive role. And I do think that we've all started on the things that are relatively easy, as challenging as they've been. But this next tranche of work is going to be even more exciting.
And Peter?
Perhaps just building again on what Tracy said, as I mentioned earlier, process emissions is a really big issue, big challenge. I think there's a fantastic opportunity though, having laid out a route map as a water industry. What that has opened up is more innovation and collaboration between companies than certainly I've ever seen in the water industry over the last 30 odd years. And I think that's fantastic because I see us working together on those challenges in a very different way to how we've done before, which is incredibly positive. But process emissions undoubtedly is the big thing we've got to go after together. I think it's also really important to remember that we also know an awful lot of the ways in which we can make great progress on this journey. So it's not about saying that process emissions, that's the big thing, therefore we can't do. There's an awful lot of things that we know how to do now, and we need to crack on with that. So there's a real important bit about let's get on and start delivering the things that we know we can do, as opposed to just waiting for something else to come along. So that's a big bit. And then in terms of the adaptation side, I mean, I think really it's about we've got to reduce demand for water. That means water companies have got to reduce their leaks, they've got to reduce their waste, but we've also got to encourage customers to use less water, because the environment is going to have less water ultimately. So we'll come up with supply side solutions, but demand reduction is going to remain really, really important and a big challenge for all of us.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Peter. And Sam, how do you see the big challenge ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I think I would probably end with what I guess is a thank you to various people over the last 2 or 3 years that have made the net zero 2030 commitment possible. So obviously 2 or 3 years ago there were very few sectors that had this sort of commitment, and it was a bold and brave step to put that line in the sand and commit to aiming for such a sort of bold and ambitious target. But it really has galvanized minds, and I think that many countries and water companies around the world are currently thinking about net zero. They're thinking about how it fits into their business, how it fits into their plans. But actually, once you've made that commitment, the galvanizing effect is actually quite empowering. And I think the companies here in the UK and the others around the world that are starting to make those commitments have found it very useful in terms of building momentum in itself. And also a thank you, I think, to the various government agencies that have supported along the way so far. So organisations like the CCC, which have been very helpful on, helping us set a clear path. But also government departments like DEFRA and BASE that have supported the policy making over the last year or two.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Absolutely right. And thanks also to Peter, to Tracy and to Hardee for being such a great panel today. And there's been a wonderfully positive themes around innovation, technology, partnerships, collaboration, and plenty there for many of you to take away as thought-provoking and useful. Before we finish up, I've got one more speaker who's going to round off our session with a few words, and that's Danielle from the Global Water Partnership. Danielle, would you like to come up?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I think what we've heard mostly here is that the challenges can only overcome together, the climate challenges. And we see the illustration of that in the innovative examples that were presented this morning of what water actually has to offer to the climate space. Both in terms of mitigation and adaptation, right? So mitigation around net zero, renewable energy, recycling, and wastewater treatment, but also around adaptation and how to manage droughts and floods at opposite ends of the same continuum. But we also heard a few other things about the importance of having better information for decision making. That this also requires behavior change and investment. But the purpose of all of this discussion is to move that talk into action and to leverage stronger commitments to meet targets within an integrated systems approach that is also respectful of nature. So in the spirit of collaboration mentioned previously, the Water Pavilion is actually living proof of what we can achieve together that we can't do alone. We heard the panel speak of opportunity, and over the course of the next 2 weeks, lots of opportunities will be available to exchange, inspire, and further those commitments. We have upwards of 100 events across 11 themes. And it's going to be an exciting COP, so we invite those here today and those who are watching us virtually to continue those discussions, follow them, and make water action work for climate for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Great to hear from you. And that concludes our first session at the first Water Pavilion of COP. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, both here and around the world. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And please do sign up and join some of the many other events going on this week at the Water Pavilion and elsewhere at COP. There's more information about that on the Water UK website and on the COP website. Thanks very much, everyone. Good morning.
Hi, guys.